Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we are doing a top 10 video. This one we're going to look at the top 10 most threatened museum ships, in my opinion. But first, here's a word from our museum.
Hi, I'm Phil Rowan, Executive Director of the Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial here in Camden. And I want you to consider helping us out at the Battleship. We've gone through a tough year. And if you can donate funding to the Home Port Alliance or the Battleship New Jersey, we would sincerely appreciate it and put it to good use. Thank you.
First, a couple of disclaimers. I am very in tune with the American museum ship community. All of the ships I'm discussing are American. The views expressed in this video are entirely my own, and they do not reflect the views of Battleship New Jersey as an organization, and they certainly don't reflect the views of the various organizations that run these ships. I do not work for any of the organizations that run these ships, nor am I a representative of them. So the information I say about them may well be out of date or not what those organizations would say. So if you're looking to cite anything I say in a news broadcast or whatever, and maybe contact the various museums first. So first off, with the coronavirus pandemic and the closure of a number of museums and the lack of tourism and travel of late, all museum ships are endangered right now. Battleship New Jersey among them. Be sure to check out the Historic Naval Ships Association website and the museum ships websites to see if there are any museum ships near you if you're interested in supporting them after watching this video. So, like a normal top 10 video, let's go from the bottom and work our way up. Coming in at number 10, I am putting Battleship Cove's Hidden Sea. So, why is she on here? She's in relatively good material condition. I've gotten the chance to tour her within the last couple of months, and in the description below is a link to a video we shot while we were on there. So, number 1, Hidden Sea is the only foreign vessel on this list. So, replacing parts, fixing things, finding replacements is most difficult for this ship out of all of them. And just for that reason, I think she deserves a place on this list. She is built out of dissimilar metals with a steel hull and an aluminum superstructure, which causes more rapid corrosion. Although I wouldn't say there was any extremely noticeable evidences of that while we were touring the ship. On Battleship New Jersey, with a steel hull and a steel superstructure, where the hull meets the superstructure is heavily corroded in areas. So the other factor here that causes me to put her on the list is she is part of a multi-ship organization, and I am already biased against multi-ship organizations being able to succeed. And she is Battleship Cove is one of the few multi-ship organizations that has retained all of their assets. A lot of other multi-ship organizations like Intrepid and Patriots Point have in the last couple of decades divested themselves of a number of their assets, and Battleship Cove has not really. So if they do start to divest themselves of their assets, Hidden Sea would probably be high on that list. And if they don't divest themselves of their assets, they have several vessels, aircraft, and other shoreside features that require maintenance. And at best, Hidden Sea is vying for a portion of that. At worst, she would be ignored to maintain other vessels. I have a close working relationship with the folks at Battleship Cove, and I'm good friends with them, and they have a tremendous volunteer corps which are working on their ships, and I do not believe that any of their ships are in any sort of imminent danger. I am mentioning Hidden Sea on this list as a way of making you, the public, aware of her status so that you can support them. And not because that organization deserves any criticism from you. Number 9, I'm putting historic ships in Baltimore's Coast Guard cutter Taney. Taney was the last museum ship I worked on, so I know her significantly better than most. However, to remind you again, I am not currently affiliated with that organization. Taney did just get out of dry dock, an effort that I helped with. And so, in theory, her hull should be in better shape than a lot of other ships on this list. She's been in dry dock at least twice since Battleship New Jersey was last dry docked. The reason I rank her on this list as a threatened vessel is because of her name. The vessel is named for an earlier Coast Guard cutter named Taney, which was named after Secretary of the Treasury Robert B. Taney, who went on to become a Supreme Court justice, who is an extremely racist individual and controversial to this day. Her association with that namesake, which goes no deeper than them sharing a name, was enough that the museum was asked by the city of Baltimore to cut her name off of the stern, and for that reason, I am listing her as endangered. A ship without a name, how do you advertise for that? How do you raise money for that in any way? How do you give tours of a vessel like that? I see that as an untenable position for the museum. It's really hard for me to say this because that ship is my first love and she is massively historically significant. The last surviving ship that fought during the attack on Pearl Harbor, her service across 50 years in active use. But how do you ask somebody to donate money to a ship named after Roger Taney? Number 8 on my list is USS the Sullivans. The folks in Buffalo recently put out a statement that they're trying to raise $100,000 because the Sullivans she's had ongoing issues with leaking and is currently listing. So they're in the process of raising about $1 million to dry dock her for a long-term solution, and they're trying to raise about $100,000 in the short term just to stabilize her so that she can go to dry dock. This is representative of that entire type of vessel. Ships in that destroyer size category, particularly the war-built ships, have pretty thin hulls, and they were never designed to last this long. So it doesn't reflect poorly on them that she has started to leak, but the fact that they're trying to raise money now to patch an active leak, I think makes her worthy of being on this list and worthy of you being aware of it so that you can potentially give your support. In the number 7 position, I'm going to put USS Constellation. She is another ship that I worked on and have worked on in dry dock. Starting to see a trend here. Ships I work on in dry dock are now endangered. Anyway, Constellation received an interesting restoration back in the 90s when I was still in grade school, not when I was working on her in dry dock. But they did not restore much of her hull using the original methods. They used what's called cold molding, which involved removing the original material and replacing it with a modern laminated wooden shell. This allowed them to preserve interior features like the framing and also below waterline features like the lower 7 strakes of planking. Any planking above that was either rotten from being on the wind waterline or when the ship's keel hogged over time had been bent out of place. When we dry docked the ship a couple of years ago, we specifically worked on replacing the cold molded wooden shell, but we didn't touch the lower 7 strakes. There just wasn't enough time or money to get to that. Unfortunately, being out of the water for a couple of months and having been years since the last dry docking meant that the caulking in between those lower planks were not replaced, and the ship has developed a number of leaks over the years since dry docking along those lower seams, which causes a lot of water to enter the bilges. Hasn't been enough water to overcome the pumps, but the fact that she is actively leaking, like a couple other ships on this list, is why I am including her here. The museum will start raising money to dry dock the vessel as soon as they reopen. They've been closed during the pandemic for almost a year now, as of March 2021 when this video is coming out. So look for opportunities to support her in the future. In the number 6 position, I'm going to put Independent Seaport Museum's cruiser, USS Olympia. Olympia, of course, is famous for her Spanish-American War service in the 1890s, and she's also infamous for being the steel-hulled vessel afloat which has gone the longest without being dry docked. The last time she was dry docked was in 1945, when Franklin Roosevelt was trying to get her ready to be part of a national naval museum. He passed away, and that never came to pass. But since the government dry docked her then, she has not been dry docked at all. Unfortunately, she's sitting in fresh water, but between her need to be dry docked and the sheer age of the vessel, I'm putting her on this list. Now, I should mention that years ago there was concern that the museum was going to give her up, or they weren't willing to take her into dry dock. They weren't doing anything to stabilize her. And being that that's the closest museum ship to us here on the Battleship, I can tell you I work very closely with their staff. They are not looking to give her up. They are making active plans to dry dock the ship and raise money. And there's years worth of work that has to be done to stabilize her hull prior to her going into dry dock. And they've done some really cool and pioneering things to address the issue in situ prior to being able to dry dock her, such as building a cofferdam which can be moved along the windwater line, which is the most vulnerable part of the ship. And they've been able to patch and repair along that, which has gone a long way towards stabilizing her for a future dry docking. So another museum ship worthy of your support. In the number 5 spot, very similar to Olympia, is the battleship USS Texas. The oldest museum battleship. She's been around since before World War I. So the simple fact that she's over 100 years old now means that she is endangered. She's been closed to the public for over a year, since before the pandemic started. She's been in the news a lot recently, because the post-World War I torpedo blisters that were added to the ship, which are not as thick as the ship's original shell platings, have deteriorated to the point that holes have opened up and will occasionally overwhelm the ship's pumps and cause her to list one way or the other before they're patched. Again, Battleship Texas, despite a lot of publicity, is not in any imminent threat, and she's being well maintained by her staff of caretakers. They are actively working to dry dock the ship, and as of now, again, March 2021, when this video is being filmed, they are planning on dry docking her in over the summer of this year, 2021. That dry docking will probably be longer than a year, in which they will do a lot of work to replace shell plating. And they have done close to a decade of work up to this point, preparing the ship for dry docking and stabilizing interior parts of the ship so that she can sit on dry dock blocks again. So a ship that is being well maintained, but because of her age, is worthy of your support. Much like Olympia, Battleship Texas is doing some really pioneering stuff, and I personally am following them very closely, and will likely continue to update you on their progress in videos like this one into the future. In the number 4 spot on my list is Queen Mary. Queen Mary is a luxury liner which is currently located in Long Beach as a museum ship and hotel. Since she is not a warship, she's not a ship I generally keep up with. However, she has been in the news recently because the company that was running her declared bankruptcy and may no longer be able to operate her. And if I'm not mistaken, they are not the first company that's operated her that has had to declare bankruptcy. So it's unclear what will happen with her in the future. She belongs to Long Beach, I believe, or the state of California, and is just operated by a company. And unlike the other ships on this list, she's not purely a museum ship, although she is a museum you can visit when she's open. She is also a hotel. They converted some of her staterooms into hotel space. So this is a mixed-use vessel that is used for events and tours, and they do some really interesting interactive tours and ghost tours and hotel space. And even with all that, because of the sheer size of this vessel and the cost of maintaining her over time, they can no longer operate her. It's interesting that there is a former Soviet submarine with her that has also failed recently and has been closed for a long time, and is looking for a new operator. So clearly there's a market issue there and some other stuff going on, perhaps because she is not being run like a museum. She's being run by for-profit businesses. They are running into issues that us museum ships are not, or that us true nonprofit museum ships are not. So while we are talking about Queen Mary, I will also mention the SS United States, another ocean liner of similar size. She has never been opened by a museum, which is why she is not one of the 10 vessels that shows up on this list. However, there are attempts to open her as a museum and try to run her similarly to the Queen Mary. Can she be turned into a casino or a mixed-use facility or something more than a museum? And again, my personal opinion here, I don't believe it can be done. I think that vessel has been sitting too long without maintenance, and the issues with Queen Mary prove that there likely isn't a market for SS United States. But that is a vessel which an organization is trying to preserve, and as you are considering supporting museum ships, think about SS United States. Number 3 on my list, I have USS Orlik. She is another destroyer that operated in Texas for a while, got hit by a hurricane. So the one time I was out in Texas attempting to visit her, she had been closed since that hurricane for quite a while. She moved to Lake Charles, Louisiana, and then got hit by another storm and broke her moorings in the last year or so, and ended up washing downstream. And the organization that has her is in the process of turning her over to another organization in Florida, which was trying to get the destroyer Adams, which the Navy scrapped rather than donate. So the sheer fact that she is in transition still, I consider her threatened. And the simple fact is Orlik is an extremely historically significant destroyer. However, she was being maintained largely by a group of former sailors and volunteers like that, and not necessarily by museum people. And I always worry about museums that are a bunch of guys with a boat as opposed to museums that are run by museum people, which arguably isn't fair. Feel free to yell at me in the comment section. There are plenty of museum ships out there that are run by volunteer organizations that are doing just fine and aren't endangered. However, Orlik was, despite her historical significance, does not have the was never able to build up the was never able to build up the support to survive major financial strains. So whenever a hurricane hit and damaged her, it would knock the museum out of operation for months and years, and eventually just permanently. The guys in Florida who are planning on taking her over have been working for years, and the Navy's just been moving their goalposts down the field, so they haven't been able to get Adams despite all the good work that they're doing. So I have high hopes that she would be off of my list if I remake this video in a year. However, as of now, until her final status, or until her status changes, she is number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list is USS Clamogore. Clamogore is a Guppy 3 converted diesel-electric fleet boat that is being operated by Patriots Point Museum. Or I should say was being operated by Patriots Point. Patriots Point, like I mentioned earlier, is a multi-ship organization which started to divest itself of some of its smaller vessels in order to
the other ships?
Yeah, in order to maintain the core assets of its collection, in this case the aircraft carrier Yorktown, and to a lesser extent the destroyer Laffey. So Clamogore, they were not able to find another home for her, and as that vessel deteriorated, they eventually just closed her entirely and started looking into sinking her as an artificial reef. Even disposal in that way isn't simple, and there are a number of regulations relating to that, and there's work that needs to be done and money that has to be spent to make that happen. And so for close to half a decade, that museum has been talking about doing that and has been unable to. And so she's been sitting closed for the last couple of years, since at least the last time I was down in that area. She is extremely threatened because she's a multi-ship organization, because as a diesel-electric submarine, there are a lot of them out there. So she's not necessarily unique, even though she's the last Guppy 3 conversion. And because she has deteriorated to the point that I don't think she can actually be repaired. I don't think if another organization could step in and produce a couple $1 million and take the ship, I don't know that she could be saved. And that brings us to number 1 on our list, the submarine USS Ling. Ling is another one that was operated by a bunch of guys with a boat in Hackensack, New Jersey. They had a handshake agreement with some developers that owned a plot of land that they could use that land, or some of that land, as access to their boat and as a static display area and park. The developer sold that land and they lost access to the boat. The things that they had in their park were repossessed by the Navy, basically. And then while they did not have access, urban explorers, vandals really, broke onto the submarine and did damage which caused her to flood and sink. And so much like Clamogore, I believe that even if this boat has a functioning organization behind her, that the damage is too great to ever be fully repaired. There is a group of volunteers separate from the organization that technically has ownership of her that have been trying to restore the vessel. And that group has, in the last year or two, come up with a ton of proposals to get her into dry dock, to take her to Louisville, Kentucky, to keep her here in New Jersey. And it just seems to me like they have no experience with museum ships. They are just another group of guys with a boat. They have no leadership. They've been unable to develop a clear plan that they're following. They're going in all sorts of different directions. I think they have as many plans as they have volunteers working on her. And they've been unable to gain control of the vessel. Despite all the work they're doing, they are not the owners of the vessel. So at any point, the Navy can come in and say that the original owners violated the contract and scrap that vessel right out from under them and all of the work that they've tried to do to save her. So again, Ling falls under some of the same problems as Clamogore in that she is yet another diesel-electric submarine. She is in Hackensack, which isn't renowned for its tourism. She's competing with the tourism markets both here in southern New Jersey and the Philadelphia area, where there are some successful active museum ships, and in the New York area, where there are more museum ships than anywhere else in the world between a series of museums. And unlike Clamogore, she is not a unique configuration. Unlike Orlik, she does not have any significant history behind her. So one has to ask the question, is it worth putting in the work to restore this vessel? Right, so that is my top 10 list of most threatened museum ships. Before we end the video, let me just talk about some threats with which the Battleship New Jersey faces. I would not say that Battleship New Jersey belongs on this top 10 list. There are some much more endangered vessels out there than us. But like all museum ships, the battleship faces problems of our own, some of them unique to us. On the one hand, our teak wood deck is very badly deteriorated, so we're in the middle of a multi-year $5 million process just replacing the teak deck. And it doesn't get into any of the other issues with the ship. Like all museum ships, Battleship New Jersey has leaks. Our leaks are all rainwater getting in from above. While the hull of the ship is 1.5 inches thick in most places, the superstructure is not. In particular, fittings around plumbing. So where mild steel piping passes through the special treatment steel superstructure, you tend to get a lot of deterioration, and then water is able to get into the ship from that. And then it's real hard to find where the water is coming into the ship in the first place. It's really easy to find where the water ends up, where the low spot is, but where that's coming from. So we often spend months chasing leaks on this vessel, only to find that the water is coming in many decks and some distance away from where it's actually ending up and we're seeing it. It causes the tile on the deck to delaminate and pop. The water gets through the leveling compound underneath of the tile and causes the steel underneath to rust. That steel eventually develops holes, and as it rust blooms up, it pops the leveling compound off and also the tile, which creates tripping hazards, which could injure guests or staff. Likewise, with the wood deck, not only is the wood rotting, but it's holding moisture against the steel deck beneath it, which is rotting away. It's fairly easy to replace the wood. Replacing the steel becomes a bigger problem. The key to preservation is you've got to have enough of the historic material left to attach your new material to. So this is a problem that a number of the ships on this top 10 list are going to run into, that Battleship New Jersey isn't quite there yet, but we will be in a couple of years without adequate support. And that is, once your hull, your deck, whatever, has wasted away to a certain point, you can't just weld a patch over it because it's too thin, and as you try to weld, you burn through. We found that issue on Taney in dry dock, that we had to weld both a doubler and then a tripler plate over a relatively small hole that was just the first hole to open in a section of extremely thin shell plating. So most of the ships on this list have had such a deterioration of their original material that you can't just put a little patch on it. You've got to patch a huge section. The Sullivans might need a whole belt around her wind-water line, which some other museum ships, particularly those up north that face seasonal challenges from ice, have had to do. Likewise, Olympia, Texas will require the replacement of large parts of their shell plating. Another challenge we face is major maintenance initiatives like dry docking, which happen down the line but have to happen relatively soon. The price of dry docking an Iowa-class battleship is roughly 20 times the price of the other dry dockings I've participated in, either Slater, Constellation, or Taney. And the more you defer maintenance, really a museum ship should be dry docked sooner than every 20 years. We're already at 30 years since our last dry docking. The more you defer maintenance, the more expensive it becomes. And that's another issue we see on these 10 ships in this list. The lack of visitation in 2020 has affected all museum ships, and other museums for that matter, but you clearly care about museum ships because you're here with us now. We've left links in the description to all of the ships that we talked about today that I personally feel are threatened. Think about looking up your local museum ship. Think about looking up the ships that I've talked about, and also think about supporting the Battleship New Jersey. Battleship New Jersey receives a fairly high percentage of our operating through donations. Some of those donations come from viewers like you. Other donations are like the one that we, for operating support, that we get from the New Jersey Department of State. What museum ships do you feel are most threatened? Let us know in the comments section down below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe so that you're notified when we create more videos. Thanks for watching.